Does it seem unusual for the phrase spoiler-free to be included on a video overview of a game? Seems a little weird, mostly because you generally think of games as being something that you play repeatedly, knowing the rules full in advance, and knowing what you're trying to do. There is nothing to spoil in the game except possibly how to play better and stop making the dumb mistakes that you often do the first time that you learn a game. This concept of what a game is changed radically in 2011 with the publication of Risk Legacy by Rob Daviau and Hasbro, where it took the decades-old Risk game and it introduced stickers and envelopes and hidden compartments that would contain game elements that would interplay only at the conclusion of a game. So the game itself changed, and what you were going to do in a subsequent game changed as a result. You did not know exactly what the game was at the time you started play. This is very unusual, and it's had a huge success and lots of follow-throughs and sequels, and people use the legacy concept in many different ways, as happens with anything that's successful. You get people who say, that's a cool idea, I want to do something like that myself. Then you had something similar in 2016 with the publication of the Exit series of escape room games from Inca and Marcus Brand and Cosmos, which again was hugely successful and has led to a lot of other escape room games, including the Unlock series, which was developed at roughly the same time but appeared slightly after. From Space Cowboys, with Cyril Demegde from Space Cowboys leading the initial design for Unlock. Now I'm looking at Star Wars Unlock, a series of 3 scenarios with design from Jay Little, along with Space Cowboys. This uses the familiar escape room context where you know the rules in advance, but you don't know the narrative of the game, what you're leading to for the end point of the actual play experience. Another weird take on what a game is. Typically, you have some sort of starting setup. With chess, you know where the pieces are and how they start. Other games will have some variability, like Dominion, you're going to put out 10 different cards. With Scrabble, you start with 7 letters, but you don't know which letters. And you have some variability over play, but you have these rails that the game exists between, where everything is going to allow for some variability, and yet not too much variability. So you have an idea of how the game will play out over time within some particular range of possible experiences. I know that in Scrabble I'm going to swap letters, or I'm going to put down letters in a word, and then I refill my rack to 7, and we keep doing that repeatedly until the bag of tiles runs out. That's the course of the game. The variability is very limited because, of course, I can't throw tiles in the opponent's face and score points off that. I can't eat letters that I know my opponent wants so that they can't get them. There's limited things to do, but I have a range of what's possible. Whereas with an escape room game, that narrative shrinks down and there's typically one path to follow. And I can't even follow the path entirely. I go for a little bit, and then I stop, and then I have to figure out what the next step is. Where does this path take me? It's a choose your own adventure, but there's no choice. It's just me figuring out how to turn the page and go on to the next step. And in many ways, escape room games are just puzzles. They are a challenge set up by the designer, and you have to overcome the challenge presented to you. And this is what happens in a game as well, because that's, in one sense, all a game is you and your fellow players interacting in a particular constrained way, trying to overcome hurdles or obstacles that the designer sets up for you to reach some goal and prove that you can do it better than other people in a competitive game. Escape room games work similarly, except there's no variability. You're just going along the path, you try to find the next step in the path, and eventually you're going to get to the end. At least that's how the half dozen escape room games I've played have all played out. There's no variability to them, it's just figuring out the next step in order to make things happen. Why these are not puzzles and are games, at least in the terminology of Board Game Geek, the site I work for, why they made it into the database in the first place, is that typically escape room games have a time limit, and if you don't solve the final overall goal, whatever that happens to be within time limit, you lose. And you can do better. You can make fewer mistakes and you get a higher score based on some metric. It's kind of secondary to the actual experience of playing the game. You're going through the narrative and you get the interaction with your fellow players and you're exploring the narrative itself and you were trying to make that happen. It's the interactivity with the other people rather than the particular game and challenge of it that's usually the interesting part. So with Star Wars Unlock, you are obviously in the Star Wars universe. There are 3 scenarios in this box, and the scenarios sort of match the 3 factions that Star Wars has. If you are familiar, for example, with the Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game. You have the Rebels, you got the Imperial forces, and you got Scum and Villainy. So that's what you're working with. In each of these scenarios, you are going to take one of those roles and you are going to play through this experience in order to reach the goal. And you are given some idea of what your goal is at the beginning, and then beyond that, stuff happens. Let me give you a brief overview. Again, spoiler free. Here are the components of Star Wars Unlock. You have 3 60-card scenarios, each of which is effectively its own game, with you being required to complete the scenario within 1 hour in order to win. You have a 10-card tutorial to teach you the Unlock game system. You can learn this system by reading the rulebook, but ideally you play through the tutorial in order to see how it works. I'll lead you through some elements of this. Again, this is spoiler free. I'm going to just show you the tutorial, which you should run through in order to play Unlock, but I'll keep most of the scenario information a mystery. You have a map of Jeddah, which you unfold only at the proper time while you are completing the secret mission on Jeddah. You also have a step-by-step solution guide so that you can be sure that you have followed all the right steps in order to reach the end of a scenario. On top of that, you also have an app that you must download to your phone, whether iPhone or Android, and you must use the app to play. In the initial Unlock scenarios, the app served 2 basic purposes. It was a timekeeper, where you'd press the right scenario, you'd start the timer, and you'd have it counting down until you hit pause to go get snacks or use the bathroom or whatever, or you finish the scenario. On top of that, you would use the app to enter codes, 4-digit numbers that would let you get past some certain part of the scenario. You check it, and if you are incorrect, typically you would lose time, which is your score for the game. That's what you're worrying about. So you want to be careful and not just enter 10,000 different choices that you could in order to try to win the scenario. You want to go through the different cards in order to figure things out and enter the correct codes and make it happen as quickly as possible. Now, what's changed with the Star Wars Unlock app is that you are really using more of the possibilities of what comes with an app. You're not just using a code where in theory you can have a book, paper, old-fashioned paper, where you have the 4-digit numbers arranged somewhat randomly. You figure out how to enter the code and you go here and you look at the result and it'd say lose a minute. And you say, okay, fine. Or it tells you something else and you proceed from there. But with the app, it gives you different things to do where you're actually using the technologies of the phone itself with the motion control and with sound recognition and with voice and other things that I won't necessarily go into, except to point out that you do need to turn on the sound. Of course, if you turn on the sound, you have this accompanying you the whole time, which you may or may not want, depending on your particular taste in music and love of Star Wars. In the second scenario, though, an unforeseen delay, if you do not have the sound on, it will not work at a certain point. I will just let you know that because I discovered that because I turned the sound off, because I do not appreciate the background music. I want to focus, and I find it very distracting to have that music running the entire time. To get a better idea of how Star Wars Unlock works, we're going to look at the 10-card tutorial, which I believe is the same for all of the Unlock games. So if you have done one of them, you have done this already and can skip ahead a few minutes. If you have not, you read the introduction, you see you're an Imperial spy trapped by the rebellion, you need to escape. You now launch the tutorial on the app, you start the timer, and you get going, setting this aside until you need it. You flip this card over and it gives you some location with numbers on it, and numbers correspond to the cards in the rest of the deck, which are not in numerical order. You must go through them and find things. So number 21 is a code card. The gold card's up here. It's got this symbol. You enter a 4-digit number and you will escape from this door, and that's the end of the scenario. Again, it's a very short challenge, but you have 4 other cards as well. You don't know anything about the code right now, so let's just set that aside and see what else we have. We have card 35 and 69, 11, 42. Okay, you have different elements in play, with red and blue cards being combined in different ways. You see they look like puzzle pieces, and you are going to combine these 2 cards by literally adding these numbers together. So if a card would ever tally over more than 100, it's probably not a correct answer. But if we combine, for example, 11, this code cylinder, with 35, this locked crate, we get 46. And you can look through here and see, yes, there is a 46. You're advised not to look through the deck. Don't put the cards in numerical order. Some of the mystery is not knowing whether you're making the correct move or not. You turn over 46. You see now it's a picture of the crate that is opened. And up top, you see this 11 and 35 with them being crossed out. That shows that you can put those cards aside and you no longer need them. Gray cards are generally the result of some puzzle or a challenge or a penalty or a result or a location that you've gone to. They are not combined together the way that red and blue cards are. We've got another red card, but we have nothing to combine it with because, again, the 11 has been removed. Sometimes you need to look at the pictures on a card and you will find hidden numbers on those cards. So you see a 16 on the card. There is a 16 here. You reveal a wire. Well, this wire could possibly combine with this data screen to power it up. It's a 58, but you look through and there's no 58, so you say, okay, it can't be that. What else can I do? Well, you have a green card here. This is a machine. For a machine, you're going to enter the number in your device, and you read through this. You see, oh, you have to use the wire to connect the pins on this grid, and you actually have to do it by clicking things. You are trying to combine them. Is this correct? No, that's not correct. You lose a minute. Oh, you could very quickly run out of your minutes by trying combinations. So you look through and you see, is there anything else you can do? Well, on the side of the box here is a hidden picture that looks suspiciously like a 6-pin grid that has a line up the middle. So you could say, okay, well, does that work if I put a line up the middle? And it does. It gives you a 9, a red 9 that you can combine with this blue 16 in order to get 25. And wouldn't you know, there's a card that's 25. My phone is nicely reflecting my overhead light here. And you can get rid of 16 and 46 and 69. All this stuff goes away. You get this modifier that is blue that you can combine with a red item, and you get 48. Modifiers can be used together with something else. It represents some sort of abstract thing. You're going to power up 48. You flip this over. You see you've got numbers in 4 colors. Well, it's a 4-digit code. Well, we need a 4-digit code here. Can we enter this 4-digit code and see if we escape? So you press code, you put in 7408, 7408, and you try it, and whoops, nope, this does not work. There's a problem. What is wrong here? Well, there's another way that you can look at these numbers that you might see if you look at the cards. This is all you have left to work with. You're trying to look through and find out the right code, and if you put it in correctly, then you will win and be done. In one sense, you now know everything you need to know about Unlock. You're going to start with a situation card that you read, you flip it over, you have a location that's going to give you some cards to start with, and then you take off from there. You have red and blue things that you'll possibly try to combine, see how that works in order to get to new things. You'll have green machines that will interact with the app in different ways, depending on what the machine is. You have to enter codes in order to progress, and you're going to keep revealing things over time so that stuff happens, and eventually you get to whatever point you should get to. Typically, escaping from some situation. Often, multiple times, there's many different steps to go through because a jailbreak movie where you get out in the first 10 minutes is not much of a movie. You have to have a few more complications involved there. Now, it's interesting, again, that this is a strict narrative going along the path, but you don't necessarily know how the path goes. You see the straight line only in retrospect when you're at the end of it and you look back and you realize there was only one way to go. Generally, typically there's only one way to go, but you don't know that in advance. In one of the scenarios, for example, you start with a laser gun, which is a red object, and so every blue object you come upon, you're sometimes like, should I shoot that? I've got a laser gun. Should I shoot that duck? Should I shoot that pile of leaves and start a fire? Should I shoot that ship? What is going on? What am I going to do with this gun? I'm going to use it at some point. Chekhov's law. But for what? And you may try to combine them together and you get penalized because you're doing silly things. You should know better than to shoot a duck. You're not going to eat a duck in the Star Wars game. Why is that duck even here? It's probably not meant to be there. So you have to put things together in a logical sense. And so you have to put yourself in the Star Wars world. And in some of the scenarios, it's easier than others. It depends on your knowledge and familiarity with the Star Wars world. One of the scenarios is Escape from Hoth, which very much plays out in the sense of The Empire Strikes Back. At the beginning of that movie, it feels very familiar as you're running through that, and it kind of hits a lot of the same beats. And if you've seen that movie, then you have some idea of what you should be doing. You have another one, the Secret Mission on Jeddah, which plays into some of the characters in the world of Rogue One, but in a very different way. Also because you're Imperial. You represent the Imperial side of things, and you're trying to make stuff happen, and you're going around different places. And it functions very differently also because you do have the map, which I mentioned before. At a certain point, you open it, and you're going to use the map to do different things. Now, talking about going on that narrative path, you can sometimes break that path, even though you're not supposed to, even though it's supposed to be a one-way path. There's one of the scenarios where I encountered a vehicle, try to keep things general here, and because the vehicle would normally move in a certain way, I said, oh, I must be able to do this, and I just went and looked for some card, and I found it. And we progressed on, and eventually we won. And then I looked at the remaining cards after the fact, the cards we didn't use, and there were a lot of penalty cards for, if you would combine things in silly ways. But there were also a bunch of cards that I had just skipped because I took this vehicle and I did something that you would normally do with a vehicle. I thought it made sense. And yet you were supposed to take these other steps along the path, and then you would reach the point that I got to in advance. So you can cheat the system a little way, and there's nothing to stop you from doing that. And hopefully it works out for you. It did not work out for me so much in one of the other scenarios where you're supposed to do something and solve this situation. And then after that happens, you get some information that you use for another part. Well, I didn't realize I was failing at this particular thing. And so I just went elsewhere and did other stuff. And I found things. It looked like I was progressing, but then at a certain point, I just realized I was spinning the wheels. I had found a solution, a code that I knew was correct because of all these various things that I found, and yet the code didn't work. It wouldn't work. It just looked like I was failing, and yet I knew it was correct. I was in a bit of a quandary here because how is this supposed to work? It seemed like it was broken. And then I look up online and other people are not having problems. No one mentions it's broken. Why is this not working? I contact the publisher because I am confused. And they point out that the way the codes are set up now, you have to go through certain codes. They have different thresholds so that a code won't work until after you jump through these other hoops. So that way you don't spoil things. And no, you can't just enter 10,000 codes in a row in order to solve the puzzle. You have to do things in the right way to unlock the next level. It was a very clever setup. It was just frustrating that I didn't find out about it or didn't even think about it until I was told that by Space Cowboys. And then I went back through and we replayed the scenario, and okay, now I see what I did wrong. So yes, keep that in mind if you're going. Certain things won't work. And so it's interesting to see that happen where you're going on and you know that this is a one-way path, that there is no veering off that path. But if you have somehow veered off, you will never find that path again because you don't even realize that you're off the path to begin with. And then once you do, you don't know how long back you were on that path when you initially veered off. And so you just should start the timer again, put the cards back in order, and just start again and figure things out. It's really interesting to see how things could go wrong in particular ways. It's good when everything doesn't work and you're trying to do a video to talk about how something works. So you get a better idea behind the scenes to see all the little details there. I've seen a few people talk about how these scenarios in particular are designed at a very easy level. Unlock scenarios typically have 3 levels of difficulty, 1, 2, or 3 locks. 2 of these are 1 lock and 1 is 2 locks. That's the one where I got severely messed up on and completely lost. And they are somewhat easy because you're trying to solve the puzzles and then get to the next level. And if you want, again, you can look at the solution guide in order to go to that next level and you say, okay, I revealed this card now I'll just close the solution book again. I'll try to figure it out on my own. You can do that if you wish. But lots of times it's just the experience of having people around the table where this person notices something and that person notices something and you notice something, and together your knowledge sort of all works in order to get you to that goal. It's a good experience when things work out properly and you actually get to that end point. It's interesting, satisfying experience once you get to the end. If you don't get there, then you just want to burn it all and throw it away. Or you just start over again and do that. So it's fascinating to see this design and how it's made possibly at an easier level than other Unlock games. Although it's not dirt simple. You do have to look around and notice things. You do have to find things. That was one of the early problems with Unlock games, is that they would sometimes have hidden numbers that you could really just not see. You could overlook them so easily and just find yourself staring at cards for minutes with nothing happening. But now, with the app, you can enter a card number and it will reveal the hint to you. Oh, did you miss this? You can set it up so it automatically gives you hints. At a certain point, it'll just show something on the screen and it'll say, maybe you should take a look at this, because by that time in the story, you should have figured out this certain element. And if you haven't, we'll give you a nudge and help you out. We don't want you to hate the experience, but we do want you to be challenged by the experience. So it's an interesting needle threading where you're trying to find the way to do that, to make it a challenge and yet keep people on that line. I'd be very curious to see in the future if we really get to more the sense of a choose your own adventure, or a way to reach different goals in order to escape, rather than having this one particular path that works. It seems like it'd be a very difficult challenge to come up with to make that all work. There's lots of different ways that things can go wrong. And I know that because Space Cowboys also releases a game called Time Stories, where you are time travelers, you go back in time to a certain scenario, and you run through that scenario. And the feeling of those scenarios is often like an escape room game, in that it's often a one-way narrative where you need to do this, to do this, to do this, to do this. But some of those scenarios will have multiple paths that lead you to the same point through different ways. And so you sort of cut off one branch to go on this other branch and everything works out at the end. But man, those things are complicated to make it all work out so that you still get to the same point but can do so in different ways, and you have the variety of the experience there. It's a really interesting challenge to try to make that work. For now, we have Star Wars on lock with these 3 scenarios that hopefully you can find the right path. You can blaze ahead in order to make it happen. And then when you're done, well, you can invite others over and watch them play, maybe help them out if they have trouble, or you just give it to someone else and let them play it on their own. You've had your fun, and now someone else can enjoy it too.